The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. Another factor in maintaining balance involves the element of time. As we peer into society's future, we, you and I, and our government must avoid the impulse to live only for today, plundering for our own ease and convenience the precious resources of tomorrow. America knows that this world of ours, ever growing smaller, must avoid becoming a community of dreadful fear and hate.
Public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive.
The cost of the war on drugs. Does it make sense to decriminalize drugs?
Going down the path to legalization in this country is reckless and irresponsible. It scares us.
Decriminalization of drugs would reduce state and federal deficits by eliminating expenditures on prohibition enforcement, including arrests, prosecutions, and incarcerations.
Actually, Brad Lamb, the reason I'm against the legalization of pot is because I've seen too many felonies. And I don't mean pot sales or growing pot like this guy up in Connecticut. I mean people on pot that shoot each other, that stab each other, strangle each other, drive under the influence, kill families, wipe out a whole family.
Now, in case you don't know, every 48 seconds, someone is arrested for marijuana.
At an approximate cost of $22,000 per prisoner, in 2009, the federal government spent $2,094,510,000 housing drug-related prisoners. Of the 14,209,365 total arrests in the United States in 2007, 13% were as a result of drug prohibition. That's like putting almost everyone in Hawaii and Alaska in prison. If drugs were decriminalized, the government would save $25.7 billion in state and local expenses and $15.6 billion in federal government expenses annually. How is the federal tax money spent on the war on drugs? In 2008, federal expenses reached $15.6 billion. $3.4 billion was used to fight marijuana. $7.1 billion was used to fight cocaine. $1.24 billion was used to fight heroin. $3.9 billion was used to fight other drugs. Every 19 seconds, someone in the U.S. is arrested for a drug violation. 82% of these arrests are for possession alone. The total number of federal inmates convicted in 2009 was 187,886,000. Of that, 95,205 were convicted for drug-related charges. About 51% of federal inmates are a direct result of a drug conviction. 47% of Americans over 12 admitted to using illegal drug.
We've turned the corner on drug addiction in the United States. Drug addiction in the United States is under control.
After 40 years fighting the war on drugs, it's easier to buy marijuana than it is to buy a beer, according to a national survey of teenagers.
Now, it's a freaky, freaky story, and it's taking place just south of the U.S. border, so we went to check it out firsthand to see what was going on. Now, the drug lords that rule northern Mexico are like most mafia around the world. They're very wealthy, and they're insanely ruthless. But the thing that sets the Mexican cartels apart from the other mobs is their seemingly profound love of murder. And it's not just traditional gang-on-gang violence either. The cartels kill anyone and everyone in their way. Rivals, witnesses, journalists, politicians, and police are all targets. And in a country where it's supposedly illegal to own guns, The narcos are armed to the teeth with state-of-the-art weaponry, 90% of which are smuggled in from the United States. So the market for the drugs is America, the market for the weapons is here in Mexico, and they go like this.
In the States, we know we traffic them illegally. That's the only way to defend yourself in this country. In order to get access to a weapon here in our country, it would cost you up to $10,000, and that wouldn't even be through a legal way.
So the majority of the weapons being used by the narcos are coming from America?
Absolutely.
And the money is coming from America?
Absolutely. I think the Americans need to really understand that any policies that are implemented in the United States impact our country.
So the money for all these guns is coming from America. The guns themselves come from America. The coke is being sold in America, but the war is being fought in Mexico. And considering 1,300 people were killed in the region just this past August alone, in northern Mexico, self-defense has truly become a matter of life and death.
I was thinking, how prohibition in America led to the rise of the mob, the Al Capones, the Lucky Lucianos. Our war on drugs, our prohibition against drugs, has caused the same thing. You see it down here. It's the sort of blunt edge of the hammer. It's the rule of the thug. You have $200 assassins. And as long as there's prohibition, it's going to continue. The war on drugs is a failure. There's never been more drugs in America, and they've never been cheaper or better or high quality.
El gobierno trata de detenerlo, el robo del petróleo, pero como hay mucha gente que se dedica a eso.
Oil is very big business in Mexico. So for the last 10 years, we've seen a steady increase in the price of oil around the world, which is why you have the cartels getting into the oil business, because it's more profitable for them to steal and sell than it is cocaine.
Crude oil is Mexico's #1 export, and the United States is its biggest customer. That sounds like good news for Mexico, but in some ways, it's a problem. Since the nationalization of the petroleum industry in the 1930s, oil has been the lifeblood of the Mexican economy. In fact, the state-owned oil company Pemex provides about a third of the tax revenues that the government uses to pay for everything from welfare programs to their own salaries. And now, the drug cartels that have already destabilized the country with their bloody ongoing war with the government are stealing its oil. We spoke to Dr. George Grayson, who has done extensive research on the cartels.
So what are some of the risks of being an oil worker for Pemex?
The risk is pretty clear. You either cooperate or you suffer the consequences. The cliche is plata o plomo. That is, silver, take the money, or plomo, take the lead. But often it's not lead, but it's steel in the form of having your head cut off with a chainsaw. They also prepare guisos. These are stews where you take a member of the family and you put them in a pig boiler and you pour gasoline on them and then you set a match to them. And because the Zetas use such sadistic, unbelievably cruel methods, typically people will cooperate with them either for a payment or for concern that their lives and the lives of their family members would be in danger.
The cartels aren't always tapping into pipelines to get these natural resources. Sometimes they simply drive their tanker trucks right into the Pemex facilities like this one and fill up. These thefts got so bad that in 2010, Pemex shut down stations and halted routine maintenance in this area. With the help of the military, production is just now resuming. While the stolen oil is nearly impossible to track, it's widely suspected that a portion of it is making its way back to the United States. In 2007, a binational investigation showed that large amounts of Pemex oil were being smuggled into Texas. Executives and oil brokers at 5 Texas-based companies were sentenced in connection to the stolen oil. In an effort to address the effects of this downturn, the government is enacting controversial constitutional reforms that would end the company's 75-year-old monopoly, opening the company to private and foreign investment in spite of public protest. While that may provide a short-term influx of cash, it still doesn't address the fact that the cartels will continue stealing oil no matter who owns it. The cartels have taken the cue from big business and have diversified their portfolio beyond cocaine, weed, and meth. Oil may be their biggest business yet, and could have the most devastating impact of all. With the resources that are supposed to be fueling Mexico's development flowing into the hands of the cartels, they could become more powerful and more threatening than ever before.
Es un país hermoso, definitivamente. Pudiéramos decir es el paraíso. Pero el sistema de gobierno que tenemos es de los más corruptos en el mundo. Y entonces eso es lo que hace que México se vuelva peligroso.
More than half of Mexico's states are considered under the influence of organized crime, according to the U.S. State Department. The figures really are astounding. Almost 94% of crimes in Mexico are never investigated. Since late 2006, the official number of disappeared in the country is more than 22,000. But independent analysts suggest that number could be far higher. And what happens next? How can Mexico channel the frustration and desperation over this climate of narco-political violence into concrete steps for change? That is the key question facing the country and all of its citizens today.
How the war on drugs is killing us and our neighbors in Mexico. During Prohibition in the 1920s, we had gangsters with colorful nicknames like Lucky Luciano and Bugsy Siegel. Now, during our current marijuana prohibition, we have gangsters with names like Edgar the Barbie Valdez and Ignacio Nacho Coronel. Prohibition always breeds gangsters, and the current one has led to massive gangs and massive crime. In the 1920s, not only did arrests for drunkenness and disorderly conduct increase once we banned alcohol, but so did thefts and burglaries, homicides, assaults, and batteries. The number of federal convicts increased by 561%. The federal prison population grew by 366%. And total federal expenditures on penal institutions increased by 1,000%. Sound familiar? We had the same exact kind of enormous jumps in incarceration, crime, and prison expenditure under this current pot prohibition. But worse yet, Mexico has been ripped apart by this senseless war on drugs. Since Felipe Calderon, under the encouragement of the Bush administration, started his fruitless war against drugs in Mexico in 2007, 30,200 people have died in drug-related violence. That's a stunning number. There have been decapitated bodies, grisly murders of every variety, and just earlier this week, 2 college students were fatally shot and set on fire in Juarez. In fact, over 3,100 people have been killed in Juarez, Mexico this year alone. When is enough enough? We tried the war on drugs for decades, and it didn't work. Worse yet, it created more crime, more gangs, and more murder. It's time to end this and legalize.